They say the poor are invisible, but I learned that the rich are the ones who can't see. It was a Thursday evening when the phone rang, slicing through the hum of my old ceiling fan. My son's voice came through, warm and hurried. Mom, I want you to meet Camille Stith's family. They invited us to dinner tomorrow night. Just like that. No warning, no question, just an announcement wrapped in polite expectation. I smiled into the receiver. Tomorrow night, that Sith's sudden sweetheart. He chuckled, that soft, proud laugh that always made me picture the little boy who used to run through the house in socks 2 sizes too big. Yeah, but it sits important. Camille sits its parents, they sit kind of particular. I want everything to go right. That word, particular, clung to me long after he hung up. When I was raising Darren, we didn't have the luxury of being particular. We took what life gave us and made it enough. But I could hear something in his voice, a need to prove, to impress, to belong to a world that had never wanted women like me in it. I looked around my small but spotless living room, the faded couch, the framed photo of his father, the curtains I'd sewn myself. It wasn't much, but it was mine. Still, I could already imagine the looks I'd get across that dinner table. The next morning, I stood in front of the mirror trying to decide what to wear. I owned only one pair of heels, scuffed at the sides, and a cream blouse that still smelled faintly of lavender from last Sunday's church service. I pressed it neatly and tied a scarf around my neck. Something about the color red always reminded me who I was. As I fastened the last button, I caught my reflection. Soft eyes, a few silver strands in my hair, lines carved by laughter and loss. People like Camille's parents would call that aging. I called it evidence of survival. I didn't dress to impress that night, I dressed to remember. The restaurant was one of those places where the napkins were folded into swans and the prices didn't need to be printed. The moment I walked in, the host looked at me with polite confusion, the kind reserved for people who look like they might have walked into the wrong place. Reservation name, he asked. Cole, I said. Evelyn Cole. His brows lifted slightly and he led me through a maze of glass and gold. The chandeliers sparkled like captured stars and every voice around me seemed dipped in wealth, low, confident, careless. And then I saw them. Darren stood first, handsome as ever, his smile just a little too nervous. Beside him, Camille, tall, elegant, polished like a magazine cover, and across from them, her parents, Gregory and Lorraine Astor. If arrogance had a scent, they wore it like perfume. Lorraine's eyes swept over me once, my shoes, my blouse, my simple clutch. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. So lovely to finally meet you, Mrs. Cole, she said, the words sugar-coated in judgment. Please, I replied gently, just Evelyn. We took our seats. The waiter poured wine into glasses so thin they might have shattered under a strong word. The conversation started with polite nonsense, work, weather, charity events I'd never been invited to. Then, slowly, the tone shifted. Lorraine asked where I lived. I told her, a quiet neighborhood just outside downtown Atlanta. Oh, she said softly, almost pitying, that must be charming. Her husband laughed. You must love the simplicity. It must be peaceful living without all the pressure. I smiled. It is. They thought they were being kind. That's the cruelest kind of insult, the one that hides behind manners. Then came the moment. The one I didn't expect, though maybe I should have. Lorraine leaned forward, lowering her voice as if sharing a secret. We understand things might be financially difficult for you, Evelyn. We sit like to help. A small allowance, say $500 a month, to make things easier. Her words hung in the air, heavy and slick like oil on water. Darren froze. Camille looked away. Gregory cleared his throat as if approving the gesture. I sat perfectly still, my fingers resting on the stem of my glass, and then slowly I smiled. 500, I said softly. That sip's generous. I let the silence stretch long enough for Lorraine's smirk to settle back into her face. Then I leaned forward, my voice quiet but sharp enough to slice through the air. But tell me, Mrs. Astor, are you sure you can afford me? Her smile faltered. The table went silent. Even the clinking of cutlery around us seemed to fade. Because in that moment I saw it, the first flicker of doubt in their perfect composure. And I knew this dinner was no longer about introductions. It was about exposure. I wasn't stepped there to eat, I thought. I was there to serve them the one thing money can step by, the taste of their own arrogance. I didn't plan on playing any games that night. But when you've spent your life being underestimated, you learn to turn silence into strategy. Lorraine Sitt's laugh came first, soft, patronizing, the kind that fills a room but empties its warmth. Afford you, she said lightly. My dear, we just want to make sure you sit comfortable. Gregory nodded, his gold watch flashing as he adjusted his sleeve. Yes, yes. Darren sits marrying into a demanding family, you see. We have a certain reputation to uphold. Reputation, I'd heard that word before. It's what the wealthy use when they're trying to buy morality. I folded my hands neatly on the table. And what exactly would your allowance buy, Mrs. Astor? Her tone never wavered, sweet poison wrapped in pearls, peace of mind. We wouldn't sit want well financial strain to cause tension between Darren and Camille. The waiter approached, oblivious to the war waging in front of him. He set down plates that looked more like artwork than food. A drizzle of sauce here, a flower petal there, beauty with no substance. Fitting, I thought. I watched Lorraine pick up her fork with the grace of a queen. She looked at me as though I were something she'd accidentally stepped on but decided to tolerate. So Evelyn, she said, what is it you do for a living again? I work with people, I said simply. She tilted her head. People? Yes, the kind most others overlook. Her smile tightened. Ah, community work. How admirable. Darren shifted uneasily. He hadn't looked at me since the allowance comment. He was too busy drowning in shame that wasn't even mine to carry. I decided to let them talk, to let their own words bury them. Gregory began boasting about his investments, Lorraine about her social circle, Camille about her upcoming charity gala for underprivileged women. I almost laughed. Underprivileged, that was the word she used for people like me. When the wine arrived, Lorraine lifted her glass. To family, she said, smiling at Darren, and to new beginnings. Our glasses touched with a soft chime. The sound reminded me of hospital monitors, delicate, fragile, warning. I took a sip, set my glass down, and looked her straight in the eye. You stir right, Mrs. Astor. This is a new beginning. Her expression softened, pleased. I am glad you think so. I smiled faintly, but not for the reasons you imagine. Confusion flickered in her eyes, but I didn't elaborate. Not yet. Instead, I turned to Darren. Son, have you ever wondered what kind of family you sit you're marrying into? He froze. Mom, please. No, I said firmly, my voice calm but iron beneath the surface. Let's sits be honest tonight. If I sits my going to be judged, I deserve to know by whom. Lorraine blinked, taken aback. Excuse me? I said softly, it sits only fair, isn't it? Yusuf examined me, my clothes, my income, my manners. Yusuf decided what I sit am worth before tasting your own meal. Camille's fork clinked against her plate. Gregory frowned. Lorraine Sitt's voice sharpened. Mrs. Cole, I think you steer misunderstanding our intentions. Oh, I understand perfectly. I leaned in slightly, enough to see my reflection in her wine glass. You think money defines class, you think humility equals poverty, and you think kindness is a favor only the rich can afford. For the first time that evening, she said nothing. Darren looked at me as though seeing me for the first time. I was raised to believe, I continued, that money buys comfort, not character. And tonight, Yusuf made me very comfortable. The waiter arrived again, this time with the bill, a sleek black folder resting on the edge of the table like the final piece of a performance. Gregory reached for it automatically, but I beat him to it. I've got it, I said. Lorraine Sitt's laughter returned, brittle this time. Oh, please, Evelyn, this dinner costs more than... I opened the folder and slipped in my black corporate card, the same one that had paid for donations, shelters, and projects her husband Sitt's company once benefited from. I handed it to the waiter, who glanced at the name embossed in gold. Evelyn Cole, the Haven Foundation. Lorraine's smile faltered. Gregory's brow creased. Camille went pale. And Darren looked like the ground had just shifted beneath him. I didn't explain. I didn't need to. Because the truth wasn't just in my wallet, it was in the look on their faces, that quiet panic of people realizing they'd misjudged the one person they couldn't afford to underestimate. As the waiter disappeared with my card, I lifted my glass again. To new beginnings, I said softly, and to knowing exactly who sits at your table. The silence that followed was so deep it almost felt sacred. They thought they were feeding me pity, I thought, but all along I was feeding them the truth. And as the waiter returned with the receipt, Lorraine's hand trembled when she reached for her wine. That's when I knew the dinner had burned, not the food, not the air, but their pride. When the waiter left us with the receipt, Lorraine tried to smooth her voice into something light again. Well, she said, that was unexpected. You didn't have to. I wanted to, I said. It sits good practice. I don't get to spend my money on dinners often. I let that sentence hang there. The truth was sitting on the table, invisible but heavy. Camille's eyes darted between us. Darren shifted in his chair, his jaw tight. Gregory cleared his throat, searching for some scrap of control. Ah, the Haven Foundation, he said finally, tapping the corner of the receipt. Interesting coincidence. I think one of our companies received 3 grants from us. I finished for him, each one signed off by me. He blinked, confused. By you? Lorraine laughed softly, disbelief fighting with embarrassment. You stare joking. I smiled. I don't that joke about money, Mrs. Astor, or integrity. The table went silent again, but this time the silence wasn't polite, it was stunned. Even the clinking of glasses from nearby tables seemed to hush itself. I leaned forward slightly, not to intimidate, but to speak quietly enough that every word had to be listened to. I co-founded the Haven Foundation 25 years ago. We provide seed capital for minority-owned businesses, education funds, healthcare programs. You be surprised how many of the people you call de-underprivileged pay taxes that keep your world spinning. Lorraine's mouth opened, then closed again. The pearls at her throat glimmered like small white lies. You run a foundation? Camille whispered. I built it, I said, from a savings account that started with $42 and the belief that people deserve chances, not pity. Gregory tried to recover with a thin smile. Impressive, I wish Darren had told us. He couldn't sit, I said gently. He didn't sit, no. Darren's head snapped up. Mom, what? I met his eyes, the same eyes that once looked up at me from a hospital bed with scraped knees and a brave little smile. You were busy building your life, son. I didn't want mine to cast a shadow over yours. He stared at me, speechless. I could almost hear the gears turning in his head, years of assumptions shifting, rearranging themselves into something truer. Lorraine found her voice again, brittle as sugar glass. You mean to tell me you let us believe you were poor? I finished softly. Yes, because I wanted to see how you treated people you thought were beneath you. Her face drained of color. That sip's cruel. No, Mrs. Astor. I said, my tone still calm. Cruel is offering a woman half your age an allowance to stay away from her own son. Cruel is laughing at humility because it doesn't sparkle. I stood, smoothing the crease of my blouse. Money doesn't build class, character does. The waiter returned, holding my card carefully with both hands. Everything went through, Miss Cole. Thank you again for supporting our staff program last month. Lorraine flinched. You sponsor this restaurant? I nodded once. Part of our community initiative, good food, fair wages, everyone deserves dignity where they work. For a long moment, no one spoke. The quiet wasn't awkward, it was revelation settling in. The air itself seemed heavier. I gathered my scarf, turned to my son and said, I sit and heading home, Darren, stay if you want. He reached for me, Mom, wait. But I had already stepped away from the table, my heels clicking softly against the marble floor. As I passed the host stand, I heard Lorraine's voice break into a whisper. She knew about us all along. I didn't turn back, I didn't need to. The truth had already done its work. Outside, the night air was warm and sharp with the scent of jasmine and rain. I took a deep breath and let it fill me, steady and slow. They thought I was there to impress them, I thought. But I came to remind them that the people they step over are the ones who built the ground they walk on. Behind me, through the restaurant's glass, I saw Darren stand abruptly, his chair scraping the floor. He was saying something, his hands clenched at his sides. I couldn't hear him, but I recognized the anger on his face. Maybe for the first time in his life, it wasn't aimed at me. The valet pulled my car forward. As I opened the door, thunder rolled somewhere far off, the kind that warns you a storm is finally arriving. I smiled. Good, I murmured. Let it rain. The sound of the door shutting behind me was almost merciful. Inside, the music, the laughter, the soft murmur of the wealthy went on as if nothing had happened. But I knew better. I'd left an earthquake behind me. I walked to the edge of the parking lot and stood under the awning, waiting for the valet to bring my car. The evening air carried that clean scent that always comes right before a storm. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I felt hollow. Sometimes truth doesn't free you right away, it just breaks all the locks at once. Mom! Darren's voice came from behind me. Fast footsteps followed. He caught up to me by the fountain, his face flushed, eyes blazing. What the hell was that inside? I turned to him slowly. It was honesty. That wasn't honesty, it was humiliation, he snapped. You embarrassed them, Camille Sip's parents, Camille me. What were you trying to prove? I took a breath. That the only thing more dangerous than being underestimated is letting it continue. He shook his head, pacing. You could just told me, Mom, told me who you were, what you do. Instead, you made everyone look like fools. I looked at him, really looked his expensive suit, The watch I'd quietly paid for on his graduation day, the man he'd become trying so hard to be seen by people who would never truly see him. Darren, I said softly, I wasn't trying to make them fools. They volunteered. He froze, mouth open. I didn't lie to hurt you, I continued. I just wanted to see whether they could respect me without a title attached to my name, and now you know. He rubbed his temples the way he did when he was a child, trying not to cry. You don't understand, Mom. These people, this is Camille Sitt's family, her world. You just blew it up. I stepped closer, lowering my voice. If her world collapses because it met the truth, maybe it wasn't much of a world to begin with. Lightning flickered somewhere above the city, and for a moment his face looked like a stranger's, half pride, half shame, all confusion. Why didn't you tell me? He whispered. Why keep it a secret all these years? Because I wanted you to chase meaning, not money, I said. Because I watched too many people lose their souls trying to impress others. And because, Darren, I wanted to know who my son would become when no one was watching. His jaw clenched. So what? This was some kind of test? No, I said quietly. It was a mirror. Rain began to fall, soft at first, then steadier, tapping the fountain's marble edge like tiny, relentless fingers. I turned to leave, but he caught my wrist. His grip wasn't hard, but desperate. Mom, please. Camille Sitt's parents, they want it, understand. They don't have to, I replied. But you do. He let go, his hand dropping to his side. You always do this, he said bitterly. You act like you sit her above everyone else. I smiled sadly. No, son, I said, just stop standing below them. For a heartbeat, there was nothing but rain and breath and distance. Then he whispered, you are going to regret this. I met his eyes, steady as ever, maybe, but at least I still regret it for the right reasons. He turned away before I could say more, storming back toward the restaurant. I watched his figure disappear through the glass doors, swallowed by golden light and noise I no longer belonged to. I stood there until the rain soaked through my blouse, until the valet brought my car, until my reflection in the windshield blurred into the city's shimmer. When I finally drove away, the wipers brushed aside the rain like memories I didn't need to keep. And though my heart ached, I knew something had shifted, something irreversible. He thinks this is the end, I thought as the road stretched out ahead. But endings are just beginnings that learned how to fight back. For 2 days, my phone didn't stop vibrating. Not with apologies, not with understanding, but with whispers, the kind that travel faster than wind when they carry embarrassment. People I hadn't spoken to in years suddenly remembered my number. Some called just to confirm what they heard. Others pretended concern, their voices honeyed, hiding curiosity like a knife behind their backs. Did you really put Camille Sitt's parents in their place? I heard you embarrass them in front of everyone. Honestly, Evelyn, you could handled it more gracefully. Gracefully, that was their word for silence. By Sunday, the story had spread beyond Buckhead's dinner circles. The Astor's charity queen had been outed by the poor woman she tried to pity. Only now everyone knew I wasn't poor. I was powerful, and they couldn't stand it. Still, I stayed quiet. I didn't need to defend myself. The truth didn't require a press release. But I knew it wouldn't end there. Not when pride had been wounded in front of crystal glasses and chandeliers. On Monday morning, I received an email from Lorraine Astor. Evelyn, I believe we should speak privately, for both our sakes. Lorraine. No apology, just strategy disguised as civility. I closed the laptop and let out a small laugh. Some people never learn that power isn't about control, it's about calm. Still, I agreed to meet her, not out of curiosity but closure. That evening, the sky was tinted with bruised orange when I drove to the country club. As I entered, the same kind of waiter from the restaurant greeted me, polite and hesitant, as if I were walking history. Lorraine was waiting in a corner booth, dressed impeccably as always, a white dress, pearls like armor. When she saw me, she smiled, but her eyes were tired. Evelyn, she said, standing, thank you for coming. I sat across from her. I was curious. I said, you don't usually invite people like me to your table. She winced. I deserved that. Deserved and earned aren't the same, I said quietly. She sighed, folding her hands. You humiliated me. I looked her dead in the eye. No, Lorraine, you exposed yourself. I just stopped covering for you. For a long moment, she didn't speak. The woman who once filled rooms with her voice now looked small, almost human. Finally, she said, you made me realize something, that maybe I became everything I used to despise. There it was, the first crack in the mask. I stayed silent, letting her sit with it. She reached into her purse and slid something across the table, a folded note. You don't have to read it now, she said, but thank you for forcing me to look in the mirror. I nodded once. You still welcome. We parted like two soldiers after a truce, not friends, but no longer enemies. When I got home, I opened the note. It read, thank you for reminding me who I was before I became my money. I folded it carefully and tucked it inside my journal. Sometimes victory doesn't look like applause. It looks like silence finally resting on your side. But peace never travels alone. That night around midnight, a knock came at my door. I opened it to find Darren standing there, drenched, pale, and hollow-eyed. Mom, he said quietly, Camille left. My breath caught. Left? He nodded, voice breaking. She said her parents can sit forgive me for choosing you over them. She said she sits sorry, but she can sit live between two worlds. I looked at him for a long moment, the boy I raised, the man learning to lose. Come in, Darren, I whispered. You stir not between worlds, you stir just standing at the end of the wrong one. He stepped inside, shoulders trembling, eyes wet with confusion and shame. I poured him tea the same way I did when he was 10, after his first heartbreak with a girl who said his shoes looked cheap. Mom, he said softly, staring at his hands, did I really marry the wrong person? I took a slow sip. No, son, you just forgot to marry the truth first. He looked up, eyes glassy. She said you manipulated me. I smiled faintly. No, I just stopped pretending. He leaned back, defeated, the silence stretching between us like an open wound. Outside, thunder rolled again, same as the night of that dinner. And in its low rumble, I heard the sound of a storm finally finding its way home. Let it come, I thought. I said, not afraid of the rain anymore. Lorraine Astor didn't strike me as a woman who ever sat in silence. She was the kind who filled every room, her voice, her perfume, her opinions. Yet when I saw her again that Wednesday morning, she was sitting by herself at a small corner table in a quiet tea house downtown. Alone. No entourage, no driver waiting at the door. Just her, a pot of chamomile, and a woman who suddenly looked older than her pearls. When she saw me, she stood, her movements slower than usual. Evelyn, she said softly, you came. I sat down across from her. Curiosity gets the better of us all. She smiled faintly. I suppose it does. The waitress poured our tea. The silence that followed wasn't awkward, it was full of all the things that had already been said between us. Finally, Lorraine spoke. I wanted to see you again, she said. Not to defend myself, just to understand how you do it. Do what? I asked. Walk through humiliation and come out stronger. Her fingers trembled slightly as she stirred her cup. I spent most of my life being the woman everyone admired, but that night at dinner when you looked at me, I saw the kind of strength I never had. I watched her carefully. The woman who once measured worth in handbags and headlines was now avoiding my eyes. It wasn't a performance, it was confession. You built your life on appearances, I said quietly. When the mask cracked, the reflection hurt. She nodded slowly. It did, it still does. I didn't reply. Some truths don't need witnesses, they just need air. She took a deep breath. Gregory sits furious, says I made a fool of him, but he doesn't understand. It stits not you I stip him angry at. It stits me for believing that kindness was weakness, for thinking compassion had to be performed in designer clothes. Her voice trembled, but she didn't cry. She wasn't the crying type. She was the type who'd rather drown in pride than swim in vulnerability. Until now. I used to host charity galas, she said almost to herself, smile for pictures, give speeches about empowering women sits. But you know what I never did? I never actually listened to one. I sipped my tea, letting her words settle. Listening takes humility, I said. The richest people in the room usually can afford it. Lorraine looked up, a small, rueful smile tugging at her lips. You talk like a preacher. I chuckled. No, preachers want converts. I just want people to stop mistaking noise for worth. We sat in silence for a while, the kind that cleanses instead of clogs. Outside, sunlight spilled across the street like forgiveness, slow and warm. Finally, Lorraine reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope. This is a donation, she said, for your foundation. I want to help genuinely this time. I didn't take it. Keep it, I said. Money can fix guilt. Start with honesty. Her eyes glistened, not from tears but clarity. Then tell me, Evelyn, is there any way for people like me to start over? I smiled softly. Yes. Stop being people like you. For a moment she just looked at me, and then something shifted. A laugh, light and disbelieving, broke from her lips. You really don't hold back, do you? I've spent too many years biting my tongue, I said. It tastes better this way. Lorraine took another sip of tea, then placed the cup down carefully. Gregory will never forgive me for meeting you, she said. He says you humiliated our family. I tilted my head. Maybe you should ask him what kind of family can be humiliated by the truth. Her eyes softened. You know, you remind me of my mother. She used to say pride was the tax we paid for pretending to be perfect. She was a wise woman, I said. She died before I could tell her she was right, Lorraine whispered. We sat there for a long time, the clinking of cups the only sound between us. When we finally stood, she extended her hand, not as a social gesture, but as something real. I took it. She hesitated, then said, Evelyn, thank you for breaking me open. I think I needed it. I smiled faintly. Breakage is how light gets in. She blinked back, the emotion rising in her eyes, and turned to leave. When she reached the door, she paused and said quietly over her shoulder, maybe someday you'll still let me return the favor. Then she was gone. I looked down and saw she left a folded napkin on the table. On it, written in neat, careful handwriting, were 6 words. Thank you for teaching me dignity. I slipped it into my purse and exhaled. The truth is, revenge doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers over tea, with trembling hands and humbled hearts. That night at dinner, I burned her pride, I thought as I walked out. But today she brought me the ashes. When I got home from tea with Lorraine, the house was quiet, too quiet. That kind of silence doesn't just sit in a room, it presses against your ribs, waiting to be broken. Then I saw him. Darren was sitting at the kitchen table, his hands clasped together, eyes fixed on nothing. The same boy who once couldn't keep still now looked as though stillness was the only thing keeping him upright. He spoke without looking at me. She called you, didn't she? I set my purse down. Yes, we talked. He gave a hollow laugh. Of course you did. She said you were gracious. I pulled out the chair across from him. She was honest. That sips progress. He looked up then and I saw it, red eyes, a face drawn by sleepless nights. Progress? Mom, I lost everything. Camille sits gone. Her parents have frozen me out of the company I helped them build. Everyone sits treating me like I sipped him radioactive. You didn't lose everything, I said quietly. You lost what was never really yours. He slammed his palm against the table. You don't understand. My voice stayed even. You think I don't know what it feels like to watch something you love walk away, to be told you not enough for someone world. He looked at me then, really looked, and something in his expression cracked. I softened. Son, you built your life around being accepted. You dressed their way, spoke their way, lived their way. But did you ever stop to ask if any of it was your way? He rubbed his face, shoulders shaking slightly. You always make it sound so simple. It's not simple, I said. It's painful, it's growth, but it's also freedom. He was quiet for a long time. The old wall clock ticked between us like a heartbeat. Finally, he whispered, when Dad died, I promised myself I never struggle again. I thought if I got close to people like the Astors, I never have to feel small. I reached across the table and covered his hand with mine. Son, you were never small, you just stood too close to people who needed to feel tall. His shoulders slumped. I thought Camille loved me. She probably did, I said softly. But love built on status is like a mansion on sand. The foundation always gives way. He took a shaky breath. What do I do now? I smiled gently. You start over. You learn what peace feels like when it isn't paid for. He gave a sad laugh. You make it sound like redemption is easy. No, I said, but it's possible. The kettle whistled just then, loud and sharp, cutting through the heaviness. I stood to pour us tea. When I turned back, Darren's head was bowed, his lips moving slightly. It took me a second to realize he was praying. I placed a cup before him and sat. You shall be fine, I said. Pain has a way of sanding arrogance down to something usable. He smiled weakly. You always have a metaphor ready. It's a mother's job, I said. We turn hurt into language so our children can find their way out. He took a slow sip of tea, and for the first time in weeks, his hands didn't shake. I don't deserve your forgiveness, he murmured. I shook my head. You don't have to deserve it. You just have to grow from it. Outside, the rain had stopped. The street lights painted gold streaks across the wet pavement, reflections shimmering like promises. Darren looked toward the window and exhaled. Maybe you were right, he said softly. About them, about me. I leaned back, watching the light dance across his face. The boy, the man, the lesson. I wasn't trying to be right, Darren, I said. I was trying to keep you from becoming someone you sipped hate to meet. He laughed quietly, shaking his head. You stir impossible. And you, I said with a smile, are still my son. He reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Thank you, Mom, for everything, even the hard parts. Those are the parts that matter, I said. We sat there, mother and son, two people who had burned in the same fire but somehow walked out whole. He finally understood, I thought, that revenge wasn't the story, it was the lesson. Before bed, as I turned off the lights, Darren stopped me at the doorway. Mom? Yes? I think I want to help with your foundation, he said. Maybe it's time I learned how to build instead of impress. I smiled. Then let's start tomorrow. As I closed my bedroom door, I whispered a quiet prayer into the darkness. Let his new beginning be softer than my battles. 6 months later, the world had quieted around me. The noise of gossip had faded, the Astors had moved on to newer scandals, and my name had finally stopped echoing through dinner tables that never mattered to me in the first place. I woke up each morning to sunlight streaming through my curtains, the smell of coffee and peace, real peace, the kind that doesn't come from winning but from letting go. Darren kept his word. He joined me at the Haven Foundation, starting from the bottom just like everyone else. I refused to give him a title. He refused to take one. He worked long hours in the outreach department, visiting shelters, talking to people who reminded him what life looks like when it isn't filtered through chandeliers and champagne flutes. One evening, I watched him from my office window, laughing with a group of single mothers at the food drive, his sleeves rolled up, his pride finally traded for purpose. It was the first time in years I'd seen him happy. Later, as we packed up for the day, he came into my office and dropped a crumpled envelope on my desk. What sets this? I asked. He grinned. My first personal donation. Don't ask how much. It sits not a lot, but it sits mine. I opened it anyway. Inside was a small check, barely enough to cover the electric bill, but written on the memo line were the words, "For those still learning what enough feels like." I looked up at him, pride softening the corners of my heart. Your father would have been proud. He smiled. You think so? I know so. After he left, I sat there for a long time staring at that check. I thought about how the world measures wealth in digits and status, but I had learned painfully and beautifully that real wealth is the ability to sleep without resentment. That weekend, I attended a community dinner, not at a restaurant this time, but at a church hall filled with laughter, mismatched chairs, and the kind of warmth no chandelier could replicate. The same waiter from Le Chateau was there, serving water with a shy smile. He hesitated before speaking. Mrs. Cole, he said, I don't know if you remember me. I do, I said gently. You treated me just fine. He looked relieved. I wanted to say I'm sorry for that night. I should known better. I shook my head. You were just doing your job, and that night so was I. He smiled, a little awkwardly, then hurried away to refill glasses. I sat there watching the room, people laughing, children running between tables, the clatter of plates and joy in life. It wasn't luxury, but it was everything money pretends to buy. When it was my turn to speak, I stood up and looked at the crowd, faces tired but hopeful, worn but alive. I used to think dignity was something people could give you, I said. But it isn't it's something you hold on to, even when the world tries to snatch it from your hands. The room went quiet, every eye fixed on me. I learned that lesson at a dinner table where I was supposed to feel small, but sometimes being underestimated is a gift. It reminds you how powerful your silence can be. There was a murmur of agreement, a few nods, a few tears. I ended simply, never let anyone convince you that humility is weakness. The strongest people I ever met never needed to shout to be heard. The applause that followed was soft but full, the kind that wraps around you like light. As the night ended, Darren came up beside me, holding 2 cups of coffee. He clinked his cup against mine and said, "To quiet victories." I smiled, the best kind. We walked out into the cool night, the city lights flickering in the distance. The same sky that had once watched me walk away from humiliation now glittered above us like a witness to grace. We didn't just survive, I thought. We rebuilt. Autumn returned before I realized summer had gone. The leaves along my street had turned the color of rusted gold, and the evening light fell softer, gentler, like the world had finally forgiven itself. Life had slowed into something that fit me perfectly. No phone calls that began with gossip. No parties pretending to be friendships. Just work, family, and the quiet rhythm of peace. That Friday evening, I set the table for one. A single plate, a small candle, and a glass of red wine. It wasn't celebration, it was reflection, the kind of ritual that lets you trace where you've been and see how far you've come. I poured the wine slowly, watching the liquid catch the light. For a moment, I saw the reflection of another dinner, crystal glasses, polished silver, and the sting of condescension, the same color wine, the same silence afterward. But this time, the silence belonged to me. I sat down, took a sip, and smiled at how different it tasted now. Not like shame, not like defense, just warmth, aged truth with a hint of peace. The house was still, but my mind wandered. I thought of Darren, of how he'd grown into himself, his voice softer now, his words slower, wiser. He'd started mentoring youth at the foundation, teaching them what money couldn't. Sometimes he'd come by just to sit with me on the porch, both of us saying nothing, both of us finally understanding everything. A few weeks ago, he had told me, "Mom, that dinner was the worst night of my life." I had smiled and said, "Mine too, son," until it became the best. He laughed. I did too. Because we both knew sometimes the things that break you are the same things that set you free. My eyes drifted to the framed photo on the mantel, my late husband Thomas smiling like he always did when life was hard but love was easy. "I did it, Tom," I whispered. "I kept my promise. I raised him strong." A knock came at the door just then. When I opened it, Lorraine stood there, coat buttoned, eyes tired but soft. She held out a small box. "I thought you'd want this," she said. Inside was a bottle of wine, the same brand from that night. "I can still drink it anymore," she said with a rueful smile. "Every time I see red, I think of you and what it cost me to learn what real grace looks like." I looked at her for a long moment, then stepped aside. "Come in. I'll pour us a glass." She hesitated, then nodded. We sat together at the table, the same table I'd set for one, and I poured the wine into 2 glasses. We clinked them gently. "To lessons," she said. "To the kind that stay," I replied. We drank in silence, 2 women who had fought a battle neither fully won nor lost, but both survived. When she left, I stayed at the table, the candle now half melted, the last of the wine swirling at the bottom of my glass. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, scattering leaves across the porch like small reminders of time. I picked up my journal and wrote my final entry. The red isn't sit shame anymore, it sits strength, the color of truth, of quiet revenge, of women who refuse to bow. Then I set the pen down, took one last sip, and smiled. I had no need for applause, no hunger for validation, no fear of being unseen, because I knew the poor woman they once pitied was the richest one at the table all along. And with that, I blew out the candle. The last wisp of smoke curled upwards, soft and thin, like a prayer finding its way home.